So I'm Jeff Goebel, and I've been helping people adopt changes in a consensual way for several decades. And my passion is about working with climate issues. And I started as an ecologist early in my life, and natural resources, and wanting to do good conservation. And then realized pretty quickly that all environmental problems are people problems. And so if we can solve the people problem, the conflicts between us, even the conflicts that we have with nature, we can actually figure out how to make this thing work very effectively, very well for us, and of course in our relationship with the earth. My work not only gets people to be more aware of the opportunities with conservation and that side of the carbon equation, but it also talks about the human adoption of that work. And that is a really critical part of all this, is that, there's all these great ideas. They've been around for a long time, even thousands of years, and yet we're very slow to get those adopted in a meaningful way that's good for our own well-being. So that's what the concept shift happens rapidly is about. So in 1649, a scientist, Juan Bautista von Helmont, did an experiment. And what he did is he wanted to understand, where does the mass of a tree come from? And so he took a 5-pound sprig of willow and planted it in an earthen pot, and he carefully measured out the soil, which was 200 pounds of dried soil. And then over time, he added nothing but rainwater or distilled water. He wanted it to be without minerals, without other things. He just wanted to see what the interaction was. After 5 years, he went and remeasured the weight of the tree and then measured the soil. What he found was that the tree had gained 164 pounds from what it originally started in the 5 years. And when he measured the soil had only lost 2 ounces of soil. So what's very interesting is, where in the heck did that 164 pounds of tree come from? And where it is from the air, from the atmosphere, from carbon dioxide, balancing with water to create sugars. And that's what the stem of the tree is made out of, is sugars from that combination. So it's remarkable what plants do for pulling carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. Photosynthesis, which is where you take sunlight and it combines in a green plant, with carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and water. And a byproduct is oxygen. Another product is sugars. And that's that capture of sugar that either is, for life for the plant, life for us, life for microbes, life for wildlife. But that magic that happens right there is remarkable. And one of the important things to understand is that carbon is a cycle. And it goes up with the emissions and those kinds of issues that we have, respiration of animals, of plants. Plants respire as well, especially in the wintertime. They're giving off more than they're bringing down because they're dormant. So there's a lot of ways that carbon goes in the atmosphere. There's primarily one major route where it comes back down, and that's through photosynthesis, through this magic of what green plants can do for us. And then when it brings it down, some of that is respired to keep the plant alive, but some of that is stored either and used as food for us as humans, for wildlife, microbes, and some of that is put back, into the soil, and some of that even becomes fossil energy, and that's where we got our fossil energy reserves on this earth. A famous conservationist named Aldo Leopold, who actually was involved in creating the first wilderness area in the United States, and also wrote several books like Sand County Almanac, and also Game Management, had a quote in one of his books, an understanding which was significant, which is, game can be restored by the creative use of the same tools which have heretofore destroyed it: the axe, plow, cow, fire, and the gun. So he's basically saying, by using those same tools and rearranging the way we use those tools, we actually get different outcomes. We've just got to see things a little differently, and it all works. And so I've taken that same thought to the problems we have with the climate issues today, and that I believe that climate stability can be restored by the creative use of the same tools which have altered it, which again is the axe, the plow, cow, fire, and the gun. I think we have tremendous opportunities by doing things differently. a number of years ago, a rancher friend of mine took some people I was working with a tribe, and we drove down this riparian area, this area by the stream, and drove through it. Beautiful grasses, beautiful willows, a lot of vegetation. And we got to the fence line, and we looked across the fence line. It was very denuded, very damaged. And when we looked down there, my friend said, "What do you think the difference is between these two sides of the fence?" And looking down across, we saw the damaged watershed, the damaged riparian area, and the grasses were grazed really hard. The brush was gone, no shade over the river, no bank stabilization. It was in really, really poor condition. And what we saw in the distance were a few cows. And then when we looked back where we were, it was just lush vegetation, a lot of willows growing, shaded banks so that, the water temperatures were cooler. They were more stabilized. And of course, there wasn't any cows there. And so the story that he went on to tell us was that the one side had 30 cows for 100 days on them, the one where it was really denuded. So that's the equivalent of 3,000 animal days when you multiply the number of cows 30 times 100 days. The other side, we were standing where this grass was beautiful condition, a lot of willows and cottonwoods and covered stream banks and stuff, actually had 950 cows that came through there 3 times for a total of 10 days. And so when you multiply the number of animals times the number of days, that side that was a lot healthier had 9,500 animal days on it that year. So it had 3 times as many animals on the land. And look at the difference in terms of vegetation. And this is exactly what Aldo Leopold's talking about, is just rearrange the tools and you get different outcomes. You can see the amount of carbon that's already captured still on the land that's already had 3 times as many animals on it as the other side. And all that's different is that it's just a rearrangement of how those animals and their relationship to the land occurred. This is more like a herd of buffalo coming through or a herd of wildebeest that comes through periodically, grazes and moves out, and gets away from the riparian area, where the other side, the animals are there continuously, for 100 days. It has tremendous damage ecologically. And so this is what the opportunities that we have with capturing carbon. And it really drives home the point of the opportunity of what Aldo Leopold's talking about. And very few lands are doing this kind of work anywhere around the world. If they had this understanding, it would be remarkable in terms of the carbon we could be pulling out of the atmosphere and putting down in the soil. Do we need to find out and do more research about these different methods that are out there? Things like permaculture, holistic management, conservation agriculture. There's a whole list of things that people are doing that actually enhance the land. And actually, we know we can do this, but it's a very small portion of the land base that's actually being influenced by those kinds of methods. And so the big issue is not whether we know how to do this. The big issue is how do we get more people to do this? How do we get more people to be willing to adopt these kinds of methods? And you can't force people to do this. It hasn't worked. And even creating an economic incentive also hasn't worked very well in terms of getting the percentage of land area that needs to change. So what I suggest is that there's something even deeper than all this, and that's what I've been working with for over 25 years now. So 15 years ago in Africa, I was working with 7 ethnic groups that weren't getting along with each other. Violent conflict was the norm, and they had 85% food insecurity. And so we just started doing some of this work where we met and we had those different diverse points of view, these ethnic groups that weren't getting along, had them talk and have dialogue, and most importantly, listen to each other in a safe environment where they could really learn to respect the different viewpoints. And then with that information, they were able to reassemble what it is that they would want to have happen. And as a result, they made significant changes. So one of the workshops I did there was on scarcity, and it was the issue about food production. And I challenged them to increase food production by 50% without Western technology. I asked them, I said, could you do 5 or 10% increase? And they said, yeah, we probably could. I said, why don't you? I said, what about a 20% increase? They said, well, we might be able to do that. And I said, well, I want something that's impossible, something you can't imagine you could do. And I said, how about a 50% increase? And they said, we couldn't do that. That's impossible. That's just using their own resources, even without Western technology. So the first question I had them do when I got to this point in the workshop was I asked them to list all the reasons it was impossible for them to increase food production by 50% without Western technology. And these were some of their answers. They said, we only make $45 a year per person. That's what they deal with in that part of Africa. So that's like 45 $1 bills having to be spread out over 365 days to be able to live. So that was one of their beliefs. They said they don't like to work hard was another one. They were very honest about that they felt lazy. They said that the soil is too poor. They said that they had poor rains. It can't be done without chemical fertilizer because there isn't enough rain. So they had these reasons of why they could not grow more food. And once they had the list, I had them look at the list and I said, notice every single thing on there, every single thing is a belief system. And as long as you believe that, you can never, ever do better than that, than where you are today. Because you believe $45 a year is a magic number for growing more food, you won't grow more food. Your soil's poor, etc. So that's the factors that's going on, the story in their head. A lot of it's conscious, some of it's unconscious. That's the stories that are keeping them fixed. So then I challenged them and said, okay, let's acknowledge that it was impossible. Let's just say, you just proved it to me. You can't do it. So let's just let the brain relax a little bit and say, okay, we can't do it. So humor me. Given that it's impossible, if it were possible, what would you do? As soon as I asked this question, they had a whole flow of ideas that came out. Rotational grazing, plant leguminous trees, build contour barriers, just a whole slew of ideas that they came up with their own creativity. And the interesting thing is that once the human brain comes up with one idea, it is no longer an impossible task. The brain is shifted. And the fact that they can add these other ideas means that's a lot more power to the possibilities. And so it's possible they can't grow more food. It's also possible that they could. And so 15 months later, I came back to the villages, and the driver was driving my truck. And when we got to the villages, and we're just slowing down, just getting ready to stop, the villagers came running up and they grabbed my door, pulled the door open. They grabbed my hand. They took me out to the field, and they had not increased food production by 50%. They actually increased it by 78%. They did that in 15 months. Plants just don't speed up. They figured out how to get plants to grow better. And all that plant growth is carbon capture. So not only is it food for them, it's carbon that can be used, of course, for them, but the root systems, there's also increased root system growth underneath the soil as well as above the soil. They did that in 15 months. Also, at the same time, because of these skills that they were learning about how to work together, violent conflict completely disappeared from those villages within 2 years after those workshops. And so that's the power of this, is that we build skills that solve problems that are relevant to people locally, that are important things like growing food, catching more fresh water supply, stabilizing species if there's an endangered species or a weed outbreak or a pest outbreak. We work on issues that are relevant to the people, and by building the capacity. And as they do that, they're able to also pull carbon out of the sky simultaneously. So we can actually work on issues that are significant that have something to do with photosynthesis somewhere in that track. So it's very powerful. Here you can see in this slide, the land in the foreground is what is typical cropland for them. That's what they typically produce. And you can see between the white paper that's there and the fellow that's there, and you can see the volume of plant material that's there. And the unique thing that was interesting was 2 years prior to me coming there, 29 people got killed by putting cattle on the farmland. The solution was to put cattle on the farmland for 10 days prior to planting. When they did it that way, they put it on there for a specific period of time. That's what caused this increase in food production. And so it's just usually so ironic that the things we kill each other for or we fight each other for are also the flip side of that is the solution to the problem. Again, it goes back to what Aldo Leopold said, rearrange the ways you do things and you get different outcomes. I did this same work with the Colville tribe, which is mostly forest communities. I did that work with them 20 years ago, same kinds of powerful results. And I did it on a ranch in Hawaii 25 years ago. I know this stuff can work. I know we can increase photosynthesis. I know we can increase soil health. I know we can capture more water. The challenge is, how do you change the human brain to be able to understand and adopt these ways of doing things? It's just remarkable. The year before I got to these places I worked with, huge challenges. Within a very short period of time, we had incredible outcomes. And all it was just a different way of approaching the problem. So the things that are important in moving this work forward is first to create what I call learning centers. And those learning centers are not big brick and mortar type complexes and stuff, but it's just getting people together in small groups, in large groups, whatever level. This picture here is 100 ranchers up in Montana that we met in a shop. And we were talking about how to get the kids back to the farm. In America, most of our farmers are getting up into the 60s. The average age is in the 60s. We've got a real crisis about the next generation of farming. How do you get young people back into agriculture? And that's what we were working on here. And in order to do that, we were looking at how do we increase profitability so that kids would be more interested and able to come back to the farm. What we talked about in this situation is where we actually reduce costs significantly by doing things that were smart for the climate and smart for the land. And by doing that, we were able to increase the profitability tenfold from what they were working with originally. We're also looking at solving real problems for them, solve local things like getting better water infiltration and retention of the water that they have so we improve fresh water supplies, or grow more food and create more food security. And while we do that, we build the capacity in people by training the trainers. So this is the example of what I was doing with in Africa. And in this particular case, I was working with the power issue between men and women. And they were picking this stuff up. It's remarkable, the ability to learn this process. Once the capacity is built, and just start spreading that. It is incredible how people pick this up. And so finally, just to wrap up this comic here, is what if this climate stuff's a big hoax and we create a better world for nothing, So I always just chuckle at that because, the real issue is about taking care of the land. And the challenges we have is how do we do that faster? That's the big thing, is how do we do it faster? And I believe that what I've been working with through this consensus building work helps to expand the adoption of good conservation all over the world. And so that's what we're looking at doing. So if our byproducts of this work is, energy independence, we preserve rainforests, and we get increased sustainability, green jobs, livable cities, renewables, clean water and air, healthy children, et cetera, if that's what we get for all this work, whoa, that'd be pretty cool. So I like this slide. And then finally, when I close, I like to ask, how did you feel about this presentation? What did you learn from it that will help you be successful? And what advice do you have in terms of making this thing happen?